Hey everyone, welcome back. For you guys who are new, first timers, welcome. All right, with that, today we're going to be doing a fan cover for our lovely little printer here. And with that, let's cue the intro. Let's talk about the printer today. All right, so I think that's what we'll be talking about today, the printer. The printer is a G-Tech Delta, Rockstar Delta, Riffraff, whatever you want to call it, G2S Mini Pro. That's what I bought. Problem here is that the machine itself, that when it originally came to me, it took me all of a week to put it together, which is great. That was fast. But for me to get it running, having to order replacement parts, ironically, to having the heat bed and everything, took me another 2-3 months. They were really good with their technical support via email. It was like the next day kind of scenario. So, here's the thing. When you buy cheap Chinese knockoff kits, they're not exactly the best of quality. What you need to look at are the main structures. And be prepared to spend at least another $100 to $200 over time. I've actually had to purchase a new, or couple new parts before I could even get it going. Literally, their main board, terrible. For whatever reason, they had they had a bad batch, and I got one of them from the bad batch. Okay, that's fine. So there's about $50 right there. Not roughly, it's a little bit cheaper than that. The other issue I had was the power supply. The power supply I originally got with the machine just did not have enough power to supply the printer with the power the printer needed. Ironically, I don't think, again, it's a cheap quality. It was a cheap quality thing. It wasn't providing enough ampage or power with what it could. It ran it sort of, not really. In other words, it powered it. Power was going to it. So I think the power supply itself just wasn't able to provide enough juice for the printer. So I ended up having to spend another $30 on that. Now, I've replaced the hot head and twice now. Oddly enough, one of them 3 times because I had to take it apart because of the heat creeping up. Now, that said, is it worth buying a cheap Chinese knockoff? Depends. Depends on you. What are you willing to tolerate? What are you willing to do with it? For me, this is a learning tool. Learning the industry, learning the device, learning how the stuff works, and understanding it. So being able to assemble it myself, being able to troubleshoot the problems, be able to find the issues and finding ways of actually improving the printer are very beneficial. Although, yeah, I originally spent $350 on the printer itself, then probably another $150 in replacement parts. Not even upgrades, just replacement parts. I ended up replacing the extruder components to something that made a little bit more sense, where I could actually adjust the pressure at least a little bit. Now my next replacement, I'm gonna have to order some new bearing, or I forget what they're called. They're rod bearings or something like that, because they're seizing up. The little balls are seizing up, so they're not actually working properly. So I had to take the printer completely apart for that. Well, not completely. I have to take the top off, which is going to be a royal pain in the butt, but not the end of the world. Because I got to pull those pieces out, replace them with the new ones, probably re-lubricate the rails that it rides on. So these are things that you're going to keep in mind when you're purchasing a printer, especially when it comes down to kits. If you're looking to just buy a cheap knockoff because they're cheap and stuff, don't expect the best of quality and don't expect it to work perfectly right once it's put together. And outside of that, they are a great learning tool, and they're fun to play with. Especially deltas are so I can watch a delta print for hours without thinking anything of it. It's just entertaining to watch the head, the way it moves, and stuff of that nature. But like I said, when you buy cheap knockoffs, be prepared to have to make adjustments, repairs to get it to print properly. So yeah, I've had those kind of issues. I've had one of the switches die on me. So it's been a little bit of a lemon, but not 100% of a lemon, because I can get it to work. Not until I replace this part, because the ball bearings have seized up in the whatever they're called. So yeah, that's unfortunate. Now, with that said, do I think it's worth buying? Yes, I do. But like I said, be prepared to spend extra money over time to replace and repair parts. And be prepared to design or find parts that you'll need to print to improve the printer. That's kind of why I bought it anyways, is for the fun of having one. The fun of producing things. And stuff like that. So when you do, if you like the Delta styles, go ahead, buy a Delta printer. But if you don't want to deal with a lot of the problems that a cheap Chinese knockoff might potentially have, not all of them are going to be the same, have the same issues, mind you. So don't think that they're all going to be the same. That's not the case. I just am unfortunate at the moment to have gotten one with some issues here. That's all. All right, and with that said, let's continue on as we work on parts for the printer, ironically enough, that I need the printer to print out. So yeah, so this fan shroud is to solve a problem, hopefully solve a problem that I'm having with the hot end where the heat is creeping up the tube. Now the other thing that I want to do at some point is buy another little tiny 30 millimeter fan. Direct that down with another fan cover, shroud, whatever you want to call it, going down towards where the plastic extrudes out of, and be able to cool the part down quickly, and make some adjustments there where that's the fan I control. The other fan that is cooling the cold area of the hot end to be constantly on like it should be. So they didn't really think all the way through when they designed this printer and started building it. They got it to work, and they got it to work pretty decently. I've got it printing pretty decently up until these little weird problems occur. It's going to be pretty easy to fix, like I said, but it's part of the course when it comes down to these things. So it's important to keep that in mind when you purchase these kind of printers. And that's why you have these very expensive ones, so you don't have these problems. They have a better warranty, where the printer I have, I don't think even has one. They have better support for the printers, and the printers are usually pre-built from the factory. And if they're not, their quality parts are that much greater. Like the CMC, or is it CNC, CMC Delta printers. They're a higher quality, but you're also spending a whole lot more money than what I spent on this. So at the end of the day, it's all going to depend on the features that you're looking for and the price you're willing to pay. If you're not willing to pay a high price, like I was, because I wasn't sure, this was something new to me and I wanted to explore it, but I didn't want to have a huge investment. Now, at this point, I want to spend more money on a different printer though, on a better printer, a better quality printer. I am actually looking at the Form 2. At some point, I want to get that a professional grade printer. So that's a huge difference in price range. Now, the difference there is the ones in SLA printer uses lasers and liquid resin to produce the parts, and far more accurate. The other one's an FDM Bowden style extrusion printer, Delta printer, which spews plastic out of a hot end. So with that said, the thing is you just need to know what you want at that point for your own personal uses. If you're doing a hobby, I do not recommend spending thousands of dollars on a complex printer like the Form 2, which is where everything about is fairly expensive. But I would recommend spending a little extra money in getting something that is truly already functional if you're not mechanically inclined, or a hobby, or have had a hobby like an RC, cars and stuff like that, where you're not comfortable building stuff or putting things together. But if you're comfortable putting things together, troubleshooting and messing with things, go ahead, get a kit. It'll be fun. I guarantee you that. But expect issues and expect parts to be needing replacement. So that's my thing about these printers when it comes to the cheap knockoffs versus the more expensive ones. The more expensive ones are worth the money if you don't want to deal with the issues. The cheap ones are great fun if you don't mind dealing with the issues that they have. The little quirks and the little complexity things that may occur. Alright. Now, let's continue on and talk about what I'm doing here. So, I'm creating the fan, or I've created the fan, I've created the shroud. This is my first attempt to the design. Measured all the bits and pieces to try to make sure everything matches up and everything plans out right. Which I did, actually a pretty good job at doing, because everything lines up nicely, even on my first shot. But there are issues that I missed. Like the original screw holes are too short. I'll get that in a minute as to what I'm talking about. There are a few other issues that I didn't take in consideration that I'll go over with you guys in a minute. But there are critical things that needed to be gone over to begin with. So, yeah. We'll be hitting that up in a minute. I just want to be able to show you what I'm talking about when I go through that. So as you can see, that I've had a little bit of trouble trying to figure out how to get the circles on, everything laid out. For some reason, I thought it made more sense to create at least a base model of the fan as a reference point. And ultimately, I realized at the end of the day, you'll see in round 2 that wasn't necessary. So, making my holes, making my adjustments, doing the things that need to be done, so I can screw it out and be able to tap the screws into the part. And with this one, I didn't bother making a runner for the wires because I knew this was a test and I wasn't going to be printing another one. I knew there were probably going to be adjustments that were to be made. That's one thing. When you're creating your own parts, you're designing your own things, be prepared to make 2-3 revisions of the part to make sure you get it right. If you don't think that's not going to happen, then you're not ever have to do that, then you're mistaken. The only way to really make sure you get the quality that you're looking for in the right shape is by being prepared to doing it multiple times. Or tweaking it multiple times to get it right. Alright, that's with that. Let's take a look at the piece and then we'll talk about what I needed to do for the next version. of the fan cover or shroud. Okay, let's take a look at this first piece. This is the first printout that I have. As you can see, I've made a whole bunch of little marks here on here. These marks are giving me information that I need to know as to how to make my adjustments. So like right here, there's a piece on the printer that drops down, so I needed to account for that, which I didn't in this piece. And then the screw holes here are a little bit on the small side, so those need to be adjusted as well. So with those two adjustments need to be made, that's where the next step will be hitting. Alright, so as you can see, don't be afraid, if you're doing test pieces, don't be afraid to mark them up, to give them information that you're going to need to know. Use it to make notes with, in other words. And that will help you in the long run. Okay, so the fan obviously goes here, and this gets mounted like this. Make sure that, excuse me, as you can see, it actually works. It was a good solution. It wasn't perfect at this point. There were a couple more edits that needed to be made, so let's move on and we'll make those adjustments. All right. Okay, let's see, where am I? Oh yeah. Well, version 2, I was having problems with opening the original file, so I ended up having to redo the whole thing in this round. So I did. I actually think it came out a lot better than what the original was. So ultimately, as frustrating as it is, I ended up spending an extra 2 hours on producing this version. It was actually worth it because the changes that I made initially are what we're going to need to be done anyway. So it was beneficial. It helped a lot to get the job done. And so I ended up having to redo it. I ended up redrawing everything, lining everything up. And this time I didn't bother making the fan again because that was not unnecessary work. Trust me, all I needed to do was draw that template out on the angle part that it needs to sit on and directly plan it for it there, which made a lot more sense with that. And I'm much more happy with the results of this. Sorry for my little stutter. I'm really tired right now. So yeah. Anyways, back to this. So, having to redo this, and sometimes it happens. I've had that happen when I was doing graphic design work. We've had to redo stuff. We had work that was provided to us. Somehow files got corrupted and we had to redo it. I've had work that was provided with us where the quality image I had to recreate. That happens more often than not. And I think in this type of industry, in the 3D realm, you're not getting that yet, but you will as things move on, and as more and more people who don't know what they're doing start producing stuff, they're going to give you stuff that you're not going to be able to work with, and that you're just going to have no choice but to redo. And a lot of this is due to lack of knowledge on their end. So don't be surprised if that occurs. I've dealt with that before in the past with traditional printing and traditional 2D stuff. So yeah, that's not that big of a deal. It's just time consuming. It happens. And ironically, once I was done getting this part completely done and printed, I noticed that I could actually access my original one, which is kind of funny. That means the way Fusion 360 works, it probably wasn't done sending information up to the cloud where everything's stored anyway. So that's probably what really occurred. What I thought was a corrupt file was never really corrupted. It just didn't have everything that it required for it to actually work properly. Oh, excuse my chair, by the way. That's just an unfortunate side effect of working off the cloud, which is okay. That's fine. Fusion 360 is a great little program, and I've learned how to use it pretty quickly. That means it's a fairly easy program to use, even though at first it looks really like, how the hell do you do anything in this? There's nothing here. But that's okay, because in reality there is plenty there. You just don't see it offhand. The way it's organized is through drop-down menus and shortcuts. But that's fine. That's how a lot of professionals work. They use shortcut keys instead, or hot keys like the spacebar and stuff of that nature. So this is really well designed to handle that kind of workflow. So yeah, as you can see, I found it a lot easier just to redraw, and this one, I actually produced this one a lot faster than I did the other one. So redrawing it was a good exercise for me, and I was able to make this a lot faster than the other one. I was able to, what I think is a better design for it. So yeah, I ended up making that little step. I actually even added in a little runner for the fan cables or power cables, wires to go in, so I can start cleaning up some of the wiring as we move along. But until I get that little seize problem fixed, I won't be printing anything, because it won't print. If it can't move, it won't print, obviously. But that's part of it. That's all part of it. I don't mind. It's just what it is. I've actually looked it up. It's only like a few bucks, like $5 or $6 for the part. So I'll order that, and we'll get the printer back up and running. So meanwhile, there's a few other projects that I got in mind that we're gonna do anyways, where I'm not working on the printer, but I will need the printer running for the end of those projects. Okay, we're getting there. As you can see, I'm finished cutting up the openings for the fan, the wind of the fan to go through. So this should solve the problem I'm having quite nicely, I think. I think this is a good solution to finding an alternative, considering I've looked into replacing the hot ends with something that had a heat sink on it, and that didn't quite work. I could buy little heatsink pieces to try to screw onto the M6 threaded rod, but ultimately, even at that point, the heat sinks are too big. They will hit each other on each hot end. If this was a single print head, you could get away with it, changing that out, but because of the way this is designed, you can't do that. There's not enough space to allow for it. So yeah, this is the next alternative, which is a good alternative anyway. So we're going to do it that way with the fan shroud. The only trick is either finding one that will work nicely, or creating one of my own. I decided to go ahead and create one on my own because it made more sense to me. And the one I did find on Thingiverse just didn't really work very well. It didn't really print. It had gaps and things of that nature. The walls were too thin to really hold anything. And that's where that stands. Sorry. Alright, so as we make progress here, redesigning the second version, I fiddled around with a few things, trying a couple different ways of creating the runner. When it occurred to me, all I have to do is just create a little hole at the top for the wires to sit on. And that's ultimately what I did. Sometimes the simplest thing is the best solution. Then I had a few other issues that I needed to resolve. That's what's going on here, is adding some meat where I needed meat. Needed more plastic, basically, to get this to work the way I want it to work. And sometimes I find it easy to use different views to get what I want. And yeah, it crashed. It's going to crash a couple more times too. That's okay. It's part of it. I don't have a crazy machine that's powering this. It's just a simple, lightweight machine. So I'm not surprised that I had those crashes. And after the export, I'm lining everything up for the next test print. Alright, let's take a look at the actual print now at this point. As you can see, I have a wall that's too thin and it just didn't register as something. And then you can also tell I've built in that little step that I needed. And I moved these back or forward or something. I also did not like how close this part got to the hot end. So I moved that around and adjusted that. Alright, so that's that. I opened up the holes here a little bit. Well, maybe a little bit too much, so that too needed to be adjusted. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes. Alright, let's go on and move on to the third and final revision. Okay, now I'm going to quickly make some edits for the final and last bit. Ironically, this is going to end up working well. So I just had some minor adjustments. I was not happy with how close the bottom curve got to the hot end, and I wanted to push it back a little bit. I wanted to make a couple of minor adjustments. I kept running into weird little issues, and this is just me and the lack of knowledge on the program, so not anyone's fault but my own. But I quickly figured it out and moved on with life. Got these adjustments made. This timeline, telling you, having that little timeline tree from everything that you've done, for the most part, is nice. Even though when you go back in time, you kind of break things once in a while. You can at least go and fix them and move on. And if it's still something that you can ignore, you can always just ignore it, which is convenient. Because as you see, I've done that here. And you can delete little bits and pieces of your history if you know you need to make those changes kind of disappear, which is great. Had a little things of fiddling, trying to remove planes that did not belong, but I figured that I got those taken care of. It's a little bit tricky getting those right, but it works. And as we quickly wrap things up here, I'll show you the final piece, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And once I get my printer fixed, I'll just have to print out this with the right material. I've printed it with PLA, which is going to have too low of a melting point if I want to print something like with PETG or something. So once I get the printer fixed, I will use some PETG to print it where it has a little bit more resistance to the heat. So, as you can see, when you go back in history and you start messing with it, it can be fiddly and you can screw things up a little bit. Not a big deal. You can always fix and delete. But ultimately, in the end, I think this came out perfect. It looks, at least the PLA piece looks correct. So, yep. The only thing now is to address the printer and get the seized part fixed. And then I can print this and we can move on. There's a little bit that I was having problems with, that weird little overhang that I had to fix. I figured out the right solution, and that seemed to work well, as you can see. Here. Boom. That part's taken care of perfectly. Great. So here we are, almost towards the end of the final design of this. And yeah, they crashed a couple times on me. Oh well. I'm going to blame those crashes technically more on my error, my mistakes, and asking the machine to do something weird that it wasn't prepared to do more than anything. So I don't blame the program at all. That I just did something weird and it didn't like that too much. That's really what it was. And I wanted to add this little centerpiece to help split the wind a little bit and help add some extra strength to it, which it does a good job at that. All right, let me switch over camera view and we'll go ahead and look at it, the final results. All right, let's take a look at this. This isn't the right piece, as you can see. No, this isn't the right one. This was I printed this at high quality, and I printed this one here at a medium quality. And I cannot tell the difference, truthfully. So something to keep in mind. Actually, you can, now that I'm looking at it in the wrong light. This piece is a lot shinier, which is printed at a medium. This one's printed at a high. The lines are closer together. No, moving on. This ended up getting printed on that high setting as well. So that's fine. Well, if I were to sand this and smooth it all out, it would be less work anyways. Alright, so let's take a look at this. The holes are now the right size. The screws actually hold this in pretty well. Now, there are some settings in PLA that I'll have to address, but I'm not printing with PLA for this part anyway, so I'm not worried about it. Alright, so I like how I changed this to a curve instead of a point. And then this does look like it does a nice job at holding some extra strength here. And the fan sits nicely and the wires fit in here quite nicely, so everything works well. And a couple of concerns are there's little potholes or pick holes right there that I'm a little concerned about, but I don't think that's going to be anything to be really concerned over. If it becomes an issue, I'll deal with it in the future. Yeah, all right. So with that, let's take a look at the part that I tried printing with the PETG. This is entertaining because look at that. Isn't it that the most amazing thing you've ever seen? Yeah, it didn't quite print out right. It's a little bit on the short side if you look at it compared to this one. Missing a few layers, I'd say. And yeah, it kind of like shifted dramatically. What happened is one of these Y, I think it is, linear rods seized, the bearing seized, and that's what occurred here. I was looking to see if it skipped due to blobbing, but it wasn't because of blobbing. It literally seized because of the machine failing. The machine literally failed. That's what occurred. But with that said, as you can see, the holes aren't perfect, but you're going to get that when you're printing in this direction. The screws will fix that, or you can use a drill to fix that. To me, I'm just going to use the screws. Same thing here. These look a little bit on the rough side due to the PETG. Alright, so when I get the printer working again, I'm going to reprint this part, we'll put it together, and hopefully everything will work out nicely. And with that said, I look forward to talking to you guys in the next one. Please leave a comment and any thoughts that you have and recommendations that you want to see done with the printer. I do want to mention a couple of my next projects because it has nothing, well, they will eventually have something to do with the printer, but I want to create and design an avatar that at some point I will print on the printer. So with that said, why don't you all guys have a good night, subscribe to see the starting of that, where we start with a two-dimensional drawing, a few sketches to determine the idea of the avatar, and we're going to go from there. And once we have something we like, we'll do a turnaround, and then we'll go to the computer and actually create a three-dimensional sculpture out of it. And by that point, I should have the printer running, and we will print it. That's the plan. So that will be kind of a long couple weeks project, I'd say. So you'll see a few videos on that. All right, I bid you guys all good night. I will see you in the next one. And leave a comment, a like if you liked. Subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye now.